Welcome back to the Venari Podcast. I'm Gov Kandola, and we are joined today by Neel Jones Shah. Neel is Executive Vice President and Global Head of Airfreight at Flexport, a leading freight forward and customs brokerage company, and is also a recognized leader in the global aviation industry. Neel, welcome.
Thank you, Gov. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and thanks very much for having me.
No, thank you for being on. And today's episode, we're going to be discussing a very pertinent topic, that of the current supply chain issues that have affected all of us through the pandemic and continue to be an issue, given the upcoming holiday season. From packed ports and empty shelves to the supply chain crisis, it's never been more visible. So the question for you, Neel, is, we see the images of ships waiting to enter ports and giant containers piling up with goods. But in your opinion, what do you believe were the initial triggers for the pressures that we're seeing and experiencing today?
Well, the pandemic was certainly the trigger, Gov. When the pandemic started rearing its ugly head in January and February, and basically manufacturing in China shut down, we basically thought we were, headed for a global recession. And then as the pandemic spread, we had this sort of onslaught of demand. The need for both Europe and the US to import massive quantities of personal protective equipment was something nobody could ever envision and could ever plan for. And as most things, almost everything is manufactured in China. So incredible rush to get PP into the country. And that started to, expose, where our supply chain, was going to break down. Following that, we saw that actually consumption patterns didn't decline. People didn't stop shopping. They actually just moved from the brick and mortar environment, and they were stuck at home, and they started shopping online. I mean, e-commerce boomed, 30-35% over historical normal levels. And people were ordering all sorts of products right now online, from exercise equipment to at-home computing equipment, you name it, people were buying it. And they were also fixing up their homes, and, stores like Home Depot and Lowe's and all were importing, massive quantities of product, given the demand. Supply chains overall have worked pretty well, but they've never really been stress tested, the way they have during this pandemic. We've had minor shocks to the system, over the past years, right? But they've always been very short-lived. The infrastructure around the world is really inadequate to support today's supply chain. And, the pandemic just exposed this. It didn't create the problem. The problem was already here. It just exposed this problem where our infrastructure is just inadequate. And on the airport side, and I'll focus most of my comments on the airport side because we could talk for days on the ocean, but being an airfreight guy, the airports, the cargo side of the airports have not been invested in for 25, 30 years. They're dealing with technology and square footage from the 1970s and 80s. Well, we are living in different times, and air freight volumes in 2021 are going to be the highest on record. Yet the infrastructure just isn't there to support it. And as you know, infrastructure can't be added overnight. It's something that takes, massive amount of pre-planning. So, I'm afraid that, we have exposed the problem. And now we need to work collaboratively as an industry, both from the different stakeholders on the private sector side, as well as government, to now fix this problem, because it's going to take 10 years to get it right.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly there. And I think you highlighted this huge surge in demand, increase in rates. But do you believe this is going to have a knock-on effect to consumers when it comes to price?
Well, we've already seen it. I mean, look at the inflation numbers, right? I mean, we are looking at numbers that we haven't seen since the 1970s. And, I don't remember the 1970s that well. I was small. You probably weren't even born.
I wasn't born at that point.
You might have been in diapers back then, but let me tell you, I do not think that it's a time period we want to emulate, when it comes to economic growth and particularly when it comes to inflation numbers. And, here in the US, we had an inflation reading of 6.2 in October, which is the highest reading since the 1970s. And so we're on a bad path right now when it comes to inflation. The consumer is certainly starting to feel this in their pocketbook, for sure, just given these headline numbers. And unfortunately, there's really no end in sight. Right? I mean, the backlogs continue. You have massive amount of products stuck in ports. You have a complete disconnect and shortage in terms of warehousing capacity. I think the consumer will end up bearing the brunt of this because businesses can withstand supply chain shocks for a short period of time, maybe weeks, maybe a few months. But when you have rates on the ocean that are 10x what they historically were, when you have rates in air freight that are 2 to 3x what they historically have been, sustaining that level of yield increase for years on end is really impossible for any shipper to do, no matter what your gross margins are. And so, it is being passed along. I think for some shippers, reluctantly, they are passing it along. The consumer at the end of the day will pay for it. But the one thing, we are anticipating, particularly here in the US, it's going to be a very weird Christmas shopping season. Shelves are already starting to get empty of the most popular items, and we're pre-Black Friday already, right?
Yeah.
Many retailers are envisioning sort of empty shelves come mid-December. So if you're one of those people who procrastinated and went out, on the 23rd of December to buy all your Christmas presents, you may be shopping at the gas station, right? Buying everybody, cheap confectionery products for Christmas, because there's going to be nothing left in the stores. And, that's the fear, because all of this product is either stuck on a ship, it's stuck in an airport, or it's buried in some freight yard under 100 containers worth of product, right? And you just simply can't pull it out.
Exactly. I think we saw Sony charter 3 747s just to get PlayStation 5. It was like 300 tons worth, which is insane. You mentioned it there, retailers and manufacturers desperate to ensure stock reaches shops in time for Black Friday and for the festive season have turned to aviation. And obviously being the global head of Airfreight with Flexport, how has the business dealt with this shift in demand for Airfreight?
You can't stop taking care of your customers. No matter how difficult the capacity situation becomes, you always have to be looking for creative solutions to take care of your customers, because at the end, they're relying on you. Everybody took the supply chain for granted, right? They just did. I mean, it was an unsexy part of the business, and it just sort of worked, and people took it for granted. Well, now all of a sudden, we're in a position where you can't take it for granted. And, this sort of market has called for, insane amounts of creativity. As a freight forwarder, we have spent a lot of time and resources and money building up our dedicated freighter network so that we have planes at our disposal. They're ours. And that has helped for sure. That's not all the capacity we use by any stretch, but it has helped. And we're going to double down on this strategy in 2022, because we know that this crisis has months, if not years, to play out. I mean, let me give you a sort of order of magnitude of what's happened when it comes to pricing and availability of capacity, okay? If you go back to 2019, and in October, November time period, the traditional peak season, it cost about $500,000 to charter an airplane to fly from Shanghai to Chicago full of product, okay, if you wanted to charter. Today, it costs about $1.8 to $2 million to charter that same airplane, if you can even get your hands on an airplane, right? So it's not like there's airplanes sitting on the sidelines waiting for you to pay that money and they'll be put into service. No, you'll pay $2 million and you'll wait 15 to 30 days to get the opportunity to have a flight. That's the situation, that we're in today. And from a Flexport perspective, again, we've doubled down on dedicated capacity. We've gotten closer and deeper with the partnerships that we do have, in order to do the best job we can for our customers, right? To give them as reliable a transit as possible, at the most economical price, we can possibly do. But as I tell most shippers today, this isn't about economics today. The economics are what they are. There's very little opportunity to influence that right now. Now it's about reliability and getting your product to market. And that's what we're laser focused on right now.
Perfect. Well, look, it might have to be an IOU for Christmas presents this year and into next year. But look, Neel, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you again for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be on, and have a happy holidays.
You too.